Tiffany Henyard, once hailed as the supermayor of Dutton, Illinois, now faces a stunning downfall, shocking both her most devoted supporters and her harshest critics. Henyard's swift descent from being a political powerhouse to a deeply controversial figure has been nothing short of dramatic, marred by a series of allegations ranging from reckless spending to questionable leadership decisions. Once viewed as an unstoppable force in local politics, her reputation has now crumbled under the weight of serious accusations. Reports have revealed that funds originally earmarked for public services were instead diverted to lavish personal indulgences, including extravagant parties, first-class travel, and luxurious hotel stays. While Henyard defends these expenditures as necessary for official duties, her critics argue that they highlight a far more troubling issue: her blatant mismanagement and disregard for the financial struggles of Dutton's low-income residents, who rely on the very services she is accused of misusing. But beyond financial misconduct, Henyard's polarizing leadership style has sparked even further outrage. Accusations have surfaced that she filled her administration with unqualified loyalists, transforming her role as mayor into a personal fiefdom rather than a public service. Her clashes with the town's board over budgetary decisions, along with her appointment of a police chief who did not meet legal requirements, have fueled further resentment. Critics describe her behavior as a stubborn, arrogant display of power, which has deepened the dysfunction in the town. With basic services in disarray, streets in disrepair, and public trust at an all-time low, the situation has spiraled out of control. Despite this chaos, Henyard's loyal supporters continue to rally behind her, claiming that her troubles are a result of a politically motivated campaign to discredit a powerful female leader. In their eyes, her opponents, unable to compete with her charisma and influence, have launched a coordinated attack, using legal challenges and public smears to undermine her. But as more evidence of ethical violations and misuse of taxpayer funds comes to light, it becomes increasingly difficult for Henyard to maintain her narrative as a victim. Dutton is now deeply divided, passionate supporters defending her and equally fervent opponents demanding her resignation. Henyard's refusal to take responsibility for her actions, coupled with her combative rhetoric, has alienated many and further intensified the town's polarized atmosphere. The fallout from her leadership has left Dutton grappling with financial instability, operational chaos, and a growing lack of confidence in its local government. Yet, some argue that this collapse may provide the catalyst for much-needed reforms in the town's leadership. As investigations into Henyard's administration continue and calls for her resignation grow louder, the question remains: can Henyard weather the storm and restore her tarnished reputation, or will her political career be forever marked by scandal and broken promises? In a dramatic turn of events, Henyard's political journey took another twist when, as a township supervisor, she spearheaded a significant shift in the way nominees were selected for the 2024 election. For the first time in decades, the township opted for a caucus instead of the traditional primary election system. The move, seen as an attempt to solidify her political power, backfired when an unexpected procedural error during the caucus process led to her disqualification, severely damaging her political aspirations. The caucus, held at the Homewood Flossmoor Park District Auditorium, drew hundreds of residents, many braving the bitter cold to witness what many anticipated would be a pivotal moment in local politics. Illinois State Senator Napoleon Harris, who also chaired the Democratic Committee in Thornton Township, presided over the proceedings. What followed was a tense, charged atmosphere, as Henyard's supporters and detractors gathered to witness what many believed would be a defining moment in the township's political landscape. When the results were announced, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. Harris secured the Democratic nomination, while Henyard's disqualification triggered an outburst of applause, cheers, and jubilant reactions from those who opposed her. The scene quickly devolved into chaos, resembling more of a political prize fight than a typical town hall meeting. Henyard, visibly stunned by the outcome, issued a fiery statement accusing the caucus process of being deliberately manipulated to prevent her from securing the nomination. She claimed that Harris and the Democratic Committee had rigged the IDDG process against her. Some viewed her accusations as a desperate reaction from a politician whose career had already been tarnished by controversy, while others questioned whether the charges held any merit, or were simply a last-ditch effort to save face. Despite Henyard's claims, Harris remained composed and focused, defending the caucus process as fully legal and in line with procedures used in other Illinois municipalities. He emphasized that the switch from a primary to a caucus was a break from tradition, but not an unprecedented move. It was entirely consistent with legal electoral procedures. The debate over the legitimacy of the caucus process sparked broader conversations about electoral fairness, the balance of power within local government, and whether the shift in procedure was an attempt to manipulate the political landscape in favor of certain individuals. Harris's victory, securing the Democratic nomination, represented a significant turning point in Thornton Township politics. But Henyard's dramatic fall has left many to question what this means for the future of leadership in the township. As Henyard's political career continues its downward spiral, her ability to make a comeback and restore her reputation remains uncertain. With the public's trust severely damaged and her political future hanging in the balance, the people of Dutton and Thornton Township are left to wonder whether Henyard's fall from grace will serve as a cautionary tale for future leaders, or whether her ambition will still find a way to push forward despite the odds. Ethics and political strategy have collided in a way that has left Dutton and Thornton Township at a crossroads. Tiffany Henyard's disqualification from the caucus, paired with her tarnished reputation and mounting legal challenges, may ultimately signal the end of her political career. At the very least, it marks a profound shift in the township's political landscape, with the fallout from Henyard's downfall leaving a lasting impact. As the township moves forward, the aftermath of her collapse could spark a critical reevaluation of how local leadership is chosen, how public resources are managed, and whether the political establishment is truly serving the needs of the community. With investigations continuing and calls for her resignation growing louder, Henyard's fate hangs in the balance, leaving Dutton and Thornton Township in the midst of a heated debate about reform and recovery. But this is far from over. Fierce rivalry between Tiffany Henyard and her political adversaries is just beginning. The dramatic events that unfolded, combined with the intense accusations and reactions from both sides, highlight the high-stakes nature of local politics. In Thornton Township, this moment isn't just about a single political defeat. It's about reshaping the very fabric of the township's future, with Henyard's disqualification serving as a focal point in a much larger battle. With State Senator Napoleon Harris securing the Democratic nomination, it's clear that the showdown between the two is far from over. What began as a highly charged political contest has now evolved into a broader, all-encompassing battle that will play out in future elections. The aftermath of Henyard's defeat raises the question, is this just the beginning of a much larger conflict, or will it mark the final chapter in Henyard's career? In a shocking twist, Henyard, surrounded by her most loyal supporters, stormed out of the Homewood Flossmoor Park District Auditorium after the disqualification was announced. With fury in her voice, she claimed the entire process had been mishandled, accusing Harris, the chair of the Thornton Township Democratic Committee, of overseeing a legally questionable procedure. But this wasn't just a moment of frustration. This was a defiant declaration that she believed her political opponents were out to get her. The caucus vote that evening, widely seen as chaotic yet decisive, marked the end of Henyard's tenure as the Democratic candidate for Thornton Township supervisor. Her public outburst only revealed the extent of the division within the local political landscape, amplifying her already controversial reputation as one of Illinois' most divisive political figures. Henyard's camp claimed the caucus process had been rigged to exclude her supporters, particularly elderly and frail voters who were unable to participate due to last-minute rule changes. However, Harris and the caucus organizers defended the process, asserting that it was fully compliant with Illinois law and that the decision to hold a caucus was a lawful tactic used by other townships. Despite her removal from the Democratic ballot, Henyard showed no signs of backing down. In a clear sign of defiance, she hinted at a potential run as an independent or even a right-leaning candidate. Such a move would likely fracture her already divided base of support, but also demonstrated her unwillingness to surrender quietly. This defeat, however, underscored the growing challenges she faced, not only from her controversial leadership as mayor of Dutton and supervisor of Thornton Township, but also from the mounting legal and political threats looming over her career. 3. Fallout from the Caucus, which many of Henyard's supporters viewed as a political ambush, highlighted the increasing polarization surrounding her. Her critics, emboldened by her defeat, began portraying the result as emblematic of her failures as a leader. These failures, they argued, were further magnified by the ongoing allegations of corruption and financial mismanagement that plagued her time in office. The public outcry was palpable, with many residents voicing their dissatisfaction with Henyard's leadership, believing that her actions had harmed rather than helped the community. Social media erupted with criticism, and calls for her removal gained significant traction. For many, Henyard's downfall seemed inevitable, an unfortunate consequence of unchecked ambition and authority. However, her supporters, who remained loyal to her cause, accused her opponents of orchestrating a calculated smear campaign designed to remove a leader they viewed as a strong voice for the community. As the dust continues to settle and the political landscape shifts, the people of Dutton and Thornton Township are left grappling with the future of their leadership. The fate of Tiffany Henyard remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The impact of her fall from grace will resonate for years to come. Will the township finally move forward from this controversy? Or will the battle between Henyard and her opponents continue to define its political future? In a final twist of fate, Tiffany Henyard, once hailed as a rising star in local politics, faced a dramatic unraveling of her political career that sent shockwaves through Dutton and Thornton Township. Her refusal to take responsibility for the growing ethical violations and financial misconduct only deepened the chasm of mistrust between her and the very community she had vowed to serve. What was once a promising political trajectory now seemed like a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and self-interest. Months of speculation had painted a dark picture of Henyard's administration, rife with allegations of financial mismanagement, reckless spending, and policies more concerned with enriching herself and her allies than addressing the urgent needs of the people she represented. Her failure to address these issues head-on only magnified the disillusionment among her constituents, with many residents now viewing her as a symbol of political complacency and arrogance. The public's faith in her leadership began to erode rapidly, and it seemed that the end of her political dominance was inevitable. The culmination of her political demise came during the fateful caucus, where her disqualification marked the symbolic and literal end of her political career. This wasn't merely a loss on the ballot. It was the public's unequivocal rejection of Henyard's leadership. Her combative rhetoric, once seen as boldness, now alienated even her most loyal supporters. People who had once embraced her promises of change and progress now saw those promises as nothing more than hollow words, as she failed to live up to the very ideals she had championed. Her supporters, who had clung to the belief that Henyard was the leader Dutton and Thornton Township needed, began to question whether their faith had been misplaced. Many of her closest allies, disillusioned by the constant scandals and ethical lapses, distanced themselves from her as the public's dissatisfaction grew louder. What had once been seen as a fresh, bold approach to leadership had devolved into an administration marked by stubbornness and a refusal to acknowledge the realities of her failures. The more Henyard defended her actions, the more the public saw her as out of touch with their needs. Her once strong connection with the community had now been severed, leaving a void that could no longer be filled by defiant speeches or combative rhetoric. The financial mismanagement, coupled with her inability to address the pressing issues of Dutton and Thornton Township, only added to the growing sense that Henyard had abandoned her role as a servant of the people. Her failure to repair the damage, to restore any semblance of faith in her leadership, was viewed as a betrayal. What had once been a vision for transformative change had been overshadowed by her personal excesses. A particularly damning revelation about her extravagant spending, including an eye-popping $33,000 charged to Amazon under the guise of community purposes, fueled further outrage. In a community where many residents struggled to make ends meet, such lavish expenditures seemed not only irresponsible, but cruel. This behavior painted Henyard as more interested in her own comfort and indulgence than in alleviating the hardships faced by those who had trusted her to make their lives better. Her leadership, once heralded as capable and visionary, now looked like a facade built on financial excess and mismanagement. The disparity between Henyard's growing wealth and the financial struggles of the community became impossible to ignore. Residents felt betrayed, with one remarking, "It's disgusting that she's living like a queen, while we can barely get by." The trust that had once been placed in her leadership dissolved, and the cries for accountability became deafening. As the scandals piled up, public perception of Henyard shifted drastically. What had been framed as fiscal prudence and visionary leadership was now seen as hypocrisy. Financial mismanagement masked as a commitment to the community. Her public image, once carefully crafted to reflect a strong, decisive leader, crumbled under the weight of her actions. No longer did she appear as a beacon of hope, but rather as an example of unchecked ambition that disregarded the very people she had promised to serve. In the aftermath of her disqualification and the mounting scrutiny, the writing was on the wall. Henyard's political future appeared all but over. Once the political darling of Dutton and Thornton Township, she was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of power without accountability. Her inability to reconcile with her critics or admit fault only served to deepen the divide between her and the public. Her failure to address financial mismanagement, coupled with her disregard for the needs of her constituents, ultimately led to a collapse of her political standing. The people, once enamored with her promises of change, now viewed her as a leader who had lost touch with the very community she was meant to serve. Her meteoric rise to power was eclipsed by scandal, broken promises, and a growing sense of betrayal. The question now remained. Could Henyard rebuild her political career, or had the final chapter of her leadership already been written? Despite the collapse of her political fortunes, Henyard and her most loyal followers continued to challenge the legitimacy of the processes that had led to her downfall. They refused to accept the outcome, holding on to the belief that the system had been unfairly stacked against her, even as public opinion turned sharply against her. To understand the depth of Henyard's spectacular decline, one must look back at the rapid rise that preceded it. Her swift ascent to power, first as mayor of Dutton and later as supervisor of Thornton Township, had been built on a carefully cultivated persona, a leader with vision, strength, and a promise of transformative change. But as her power grew, so did the cracks in her facade. The contrast between Henyard's increasing influence and the financial struggles of her constituents became a major point of contention. Allegations of extravagant spending, particularly the $33,000 charge to Amazon, highlighted a glaring disconnect between Henyard's lavish lifestyle and the struggles of the community. This betrayal, more than any political loss, marked the turning point in her career. Her supporters, who once viewed her as a beacon of hope, began to reevaluate their faith in her, and many of her closest allies turned their backs. What had once been hailed as visionary leadership now seemed to be nothing more than a pursuit of power for its own sake. The leader who had promised change was now viewed as a cautionary example of ambition gone unchecked, a leader who, in the end, had failed the very people she sought to serve. Tiffany Henyard, once seen as a beacon of potential for positive change, in local politics, now serves as a tragic example of how unchecked power can lead to corruption and failure. Her leadership, which was supposed to uplift the community, became a stark contrast to the very ideals she promised. The ripple effects of her actions reached far beyond her inner circle, leaving a disgruntled and disillusioned population in its wake. The people of Dutton and Thornton Township, once hopeful for reform, now found themselves at the mercy of a political system that had been hijacked by wasteful squabbles. The critical community projects they desperately needed were delayed or even canceled, and public services deteriorated as the focus shifted from meeting the needs of the people to petty political games. This stark shift in priorities deepened the growing disconnect between Henyard and the very residents she was meant to serve. The question of whether Henyard's actions were driven by personal ambition or a genuine desire to serve her constituents became increasingly complicated. The charges against her, which mounted as time passed, only fueled the demand for a leadership model grounded in humility and accountability. Her bid for supervisor of Thornton Township, already tainted by scandals, hit its dramatic peak when she made the shocking decision to abandon her campaign just 7 minutes after it began. This abrupt exit sent ripples through the political landscape, escalating the financial stakes and adding pressure to an already volatile situation. Stephanie Wheatman, a local political observer, pointed out the ramifications of Henyard's missteps, noting that failing to secure the necessary permits and approvals for projects could cost the community as much as $40,000, an unnecessary financial burden. Beyond this, important community projects that were supposed to benefit local residents were now in jeopardy. The rising risks, combined with Henyard's tough, controlling approach to management, escalated the internal conflict within her administration, intensifying the divide between her and the community she vowed to lead. Despite not yet being formally indicted, the ongoing FBI investigation into Henyard's administration represented a critical blow to her already dwindling political power. The investigation's growing intensity further tarnished her reputation, with critics sharpening their attacks. Her refusal to acknowledge the public's concerns or take responsibility for her actions only deepened her disfavor. Henyard's inner circle, once a source of unwavering support, began to unravel. Staff resignations became frequent, and longtime allies distanced themselves as the investigation continued to chip away at her credibility. In an attempt to regain some control over the narrative, Henyard posted a defiant video on Facebook. In the video, she questioned why she was receiving so much scrutiny, accusing her critics of orchestrating a smear campaign to distract from more important issues. But this defensiveness did her no favors. It only alienated the public further, reinforcing the perception that she was out of touch with the very people she had sworn to serve. Her refusal to confront the growing issues head-on made it increasingly difficult for anyone to see her as a leader worthy of trust. As her political rivals saw an opening, they wasted no time in emphasizing Henyard's leadership flaws. The growing divisions within her administration, coupled with stalled projects and worsening tensions with the community, only highlighted her failure to manage the increasing pressure. Every new incident, whether it was delayed services or public disputes, further escalated the decline of her support. In a last-ditch effort to turn the tide, Henyard attempted to engage with the public by organizing local gatherings and attempting to reshape her image through the media. But these efforts quickly backfired. Media outlets began to portray her actions as desperate and, in some cases, mocked her attempts to position herself as a compassionate, transformative leader. It was clear to everyone watching that her political career, once fueled by ambition, was crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. As her leadership continued to unravel, it became evident that Henyard had failed not only to deliver on her promises, but had created a legacy of mistrust, disillusionment, and missed opportunities. Her inability to balance the growing power she had amassed with the very real needs of her community proved to be her undoing. But perhaps most devastating of all was her refusal to take responsibility for her actions. This stubbornness sealed her fate, marking the end of her political career and reinforcing the cautionary lesson of what happens when ambition is left unchecked. The fallout from Henyard's leadership failures left Dutton and Thornton Township in disarray. Residents found themselves questioning the very nature of leadership and the damage that unchecked ambition can inflict on both a political career and the lives of the people it is meant to serve. Her once promising ascent had now been overshadowed by scandal, and the community that had once rallied behind her was left wondering what went wrong. The story of Tiffany Henyard's rise and fall will undoubtedly be remembered as one of the most dramatic political declines in recent memory. What began as a career filled with promise and the potential for change ended as a painful reminder of the corrupting influence of power when it is wielded without accountability. The lessons learned from her downfall will continue to resonate as a warning for future leaders who may one day face the same temptations. Thank you for watching this deep dive into Tiffany Henyard's tragic political decline. Stay tuned for more updates and analysis on local politics, leadership, and accountability.